Hello, this is John Spink, Director of the Food Fraud Initiative at Michigan State University, and this is a preliminary review of my presentation Defining the Public Health Threat of Food Fraud at the Food Fraud Conference 2018, Wednesday, July 4th, in Port of Spain, Trinidad. First off, just an overview of Michigan State University and our research group. We focus on three components: research, education, and outreach. So me in this presentation is conducting outreach. I'm learning from you. I'm learning from the week that I'm here, from the visits with government and industry and traveling on sites. That gives me insight. And even during this week while I've been here, I've changed this presentation several times because I've adapted the way that I look at the world, and the way that I look at food fraud prevention, and that goes back into research. The research itself then goes back into our education, our graduate courses, and other teaching, and that then cycles back out to presenting more. And that's how we cycle. We are a university, so what we focus on is curriculum, education. Our first real focus area are MOOCs, Massive Open Online Courses. These are 2-hour webinars usually, and they're free. The content is always free. There is a certificate of completion for a fee, but the content is always free. Our basic ones are our Overview MOOC, which looks at food fraud in general, and then we have a Food Fraud Audit Guide. So this is a combination to train auditors to conduct food fraud audits, but also if you're a manufacturer or brand owner or retailer, to be audited, to understand what will go on in that process. We offer those usually monthly. We also have a food defense audit guide. What we found is with GFSI and other types of industry requirements that a lot of the expectations and deliverables and the documentation is very similar to food fraud. And that's a research area that we've also worked in. So we also have a food defense audit guide. And finally, we have a new Food Fraud Vulnerability Assessment and Food Fraud Prevention Strategy Development MOOC that's similar to my presentations here in Trinidad today, and tomorrow conducting a vulnerability assessment, presenting that to a broader group. That's just an online version of that. All these courses are available to register through our website. Again, they're usually offered monthly, and the content's always free. We also conduct executive education that's at Michigan State or around the country, around the world. These are more intensive, on-site, direct one-on-one engagements. And then the key with our graduate courses is our food safety program is online. It's 100% online. So you never have to come to Michigan State unless I guess you want to. But the courses are online. So we have people that travel the world, that live anywhere in the world, and that's really a great resource for them. Related to food fraud, we have 6 courses that address food fraud in one way or another. And we'll say these are real graduate classes. They're not just watch a video and answer 3 quiz questions. These are 15 weeks, and they're very intensive. But that's what you want if you're going to be leading food fraud prevention. So if you take 4 of those courses, you can earn a graduate certificate in food fraud prevention. And this is just a broader statement that you've made effort to really build up your base understanding. And if those credits are great for you, enjoy the classes, you can roll those into a Master's of Science in Food Safety online. And another kind of parallel program is our Certificate in International Food Law. And so these are things that might be interesting for you as you're gaining your education. At least start with the basic MOOCs, because these are short and they're free. Feel free to forward the links, information anywhere, post them anywhere. We have near limitless capacity. So specifically looking at Trinidad and Tobago for this week. A key starting point for this creation of this conference and us becoming involved was a review of parliamentary inquiry into the food fraud in Trinidad and Tobago. This was a report from the Parliament published in June 2017, and a lot of the actions here are direct results and follow-ups from identified unmet needs in that report. And I provided the PDF, the link to the PDF here. So really, this is a starting point. The second report on the food fraud in Trinidad. It's a very thorough document. I think the Elliott Review in the UK is the most thorough, comprehensive review of an incident and the starting point, the baseline, and identifying steps for a country. And this, for me, is one of the most, if not the most thorough review of the application, because what it does is it builds upon the base questions, but then also goes into reviewing incidents in detail and starting to look at how the government might align and engage with the public-private partnership with industry, academics, NGOs, to really get the country on a path of a food fraud prevention plan. The report focuses on a review of the problem, which of course is important, a need for a definition. So this is a really important starting point. I've constantly had discussions this week of what's food fraud. Is this in? Is this out? Does that count? And that's the key, is to have some central document that does define the scope. Now, this might not be law or regulation. This might just be a statement document or another one of these parliamentary reports that just states the expectation. But that's a real key for that starting point. Conduct an assessment. That was something that was identified next to really look at in more detail. But there was an interesting survey of the marketplace to really review what people believe is the problem at the start. So there is the beginning of an assessment there. Then consider the needs. And this really starts to cross over into how are things organized and what are the needs of the marketplace and the government within. We have to understand everybody has limited resources, and so optimize the resources that you have. What I found in this report is there's very applied thinking. I think it's very rational. I think it's very pragmatic. It's very just a simple way to start looking at the problem. And that's something that's been really interesting for me. It's very proactive. And really, I think it really a starting point for you is to begin with your own lessons learned. But also, as you've done here, is you've created a conference where you bring together people that are expert in a lot of different areas around the topic. And that's a key, an interdisciplinary group to understand. And you can build on our experiences and you can avoid some of our less efficient acts and steps. So look at the detail, look at the report in more detail. I won't read the whole thing there, but a key here is define food, even if only as a summary of other laws and regulations. So that's throughout the document and in the findings. It is already illegal, all types of fraud under one law or another. And that's a real key, is to have some type of document that reviews this and states this and emphasizes that. And it might even point out where the different actions are illegal in different under different regulations or under different ministries. Then there really is a key next step here, and I'm reading into this a little bit more than this says to have a body to really implement it. But the first step is to just really give a more detailed proposal of what's really required. So there's already in here the requirement or the recommendation for a centrally entrusted interdisciplinary interagency task force. I'll get into that in more detail more this afternoon in my presentation, but that's the real key first step to really put this together and identify your needs. Review if desired outcome achieved by current processes. So there may be a way for you to build upon and just expand the activities. I won't even say enforcement within your current laws and regulations. I think a lot of it is stating your intent and then focusing the resources you have. So there's been a lot of ways we've seen applying crime science theory to persuade people to not make an act, and we'll cover that more in the next week. But that's really important that you've already got these findings here. So everything we're talking about this week, today and tomorrow at the conferences, build upon the needs and the foundation from this parliamentary document. So something else that's really important to look here is in these the insights. Really, you've already got in there the real key step to implement a food fraud prevention strategy. This is not a reaction. It's not just a response to one issue. It's not just melamine in milk. It's a response to all food fraud, and that's really important to start at the top and have this broad concept. Now, the key is that if you really put a strategy in place, it's not just reactionary for one event. It only expands to meet your needs. You've got a strategy here. You calibrate it, and it can calibrate up and down. It can grow and shrink as the concerns change. Really, the thing here is another aspect in the recommendations: support capacity. Now, this is building people that understand the problem, as well as the capabilities to do things like testing. Authenticity testing is really critical. So eventually, once you have the strategy in place, you'll be able to identify where you do have unmet needs, and you'll need to support that capacity building to achieve your objectives. Training. This is so key. Along the way, we may sit here this week, but if someone starts your company or agency next week, well, they missed out on this opportunity. So there's really ways to focus on and really consider training and continual education and updates Refining the process is a very critical step. And so just build that into the system there. Now, when you look around, there are a lot of resources. I just mentioned our MOOCs. That's one of them. That's exactly why we were created, and that's why we have things like MOOCs. So that if someone does start next week, then, well, this lecture, it's on YouTube posted publicly. So new people can find it and learn from it. And then, in a year, we'll look at this again, maybe, and then we'll adjust for what's been happening around the world to continue to think about training. Now, one thing I did notice about the report, it focuses on in-country food fraud, and it didn't focus on your exports. And that is really important to look at public health. Public health you're thinking about within your country, but don't exclude the thought of exports, because when we're looking at food fraud, if we're going to consider food fraud, we really should consider what's coming in and what's going out. Because when we're looking at your products in the marketplace around the world, we'll learn more that can be applied back here at home. But also, this is a big economic driver. This is not just about reducing the threats of public health here at home. It's also about improving public health and public welfare by increasing the economic consistency and growth in gross domestic product. So when you consider food fraud, it's a great way to think about ways to protect your products as they're exported around the world, especially, I would say, when you've got some new high-value products that you're considering. Then you've got to consider that competitors will legally try to move into a market that's hot. If you create some new product, they'll try to find a way to do that, as you would, we all would. But also, there's going to be criminals that will try to address this from a fraudulent way and benefit. So if we think about that early on, then you have a better chance for those products to be successful in the market. Also, this builds confidence in the entrepreneurs and the producers that if they do make that extra effort to expand their farm, expand production, and extra effort developing products, that they will have that success in the long haul. And that just cycles back to having better and higher quality product and more products here at home. In the report, it was great to see that there were some very key points looking at specific issues. That's always important to start with specific issues. If you talk generally, it doesn't generally help, or it generally helps. If you talk about specifics, it specifically helps. So honey, milk, poultry that was thawed and frozen and then thawed, seafood labeling, coconut water, those were all addressed in country. There were some also some issues that were from imported products, and it mentioned the Brazilian beef and the Argentinian corned beef. A key point here is you surveyed the marketplace and started an incident review. So a small group didn't just define a problem and judge it themselves. It was looking at a very big and thorough group. We've built a great foundation. The second point is identify the types of food fraud. So you actually went another step that a lot of people haven't done before, because I think maybe there wasn't a lot of the information out there. But you then defined, you went further and looked at the types of fraud, and then the incidents, and then you built upon that and you defined and identified the types of fraud. So you're already moving ahead with this broad focus and showing a lot of depth to this research. So last kind of key point of detail is exchange. The real focus for reducing food fraud, the most impactful point, is the exchange of goods and services, where product is bought and sold. So that's a supplier to customer. So say a retailer, and I mentioned here that they ask in the report the role of supermarkets in the fight against food fraud. That's a key point where you're getting ready to receive that product, and if you reject it, that can cause a lot of problems. But also, I'd say agency to business as well, because there's a key point there. If that supermarket rejects a load, what happens to that product? Does it just go back out and go to another port? Does it go back out and come back to this port? And maybe some products that have come to this port were rejected at other ports. So there's a key point here of the exchange of goods and services where there's the most power of influence on suppliers. And also there's a key role you've got to ask of the role of government in that process, and that's where agencies look at that as well. Now, agencies also have a really important point at the port of entry. So a combination of here is real key. So we do see that supermarkets or the retailers have one of the most impactful spots for food fraud prevention. I think something else to consider is that consumers buy from a retailer. Even if they buy a brand, they shift their focus to that brand, but they're buying from the retailer itself. So that's real key that the retailers have a big risk in this as well. And then what we've seen around the world, the implementation has been the GFSI Global Food Safety Initiative, looking at standards such as FSSC, SQF, IFS, BRC, and others. So into the next step of defining food fraud. So this was a clearly item number one on the findings and needs. So we'll move into that now. Overall, food fraud is illegal deception for economic gain using food. Now, there are other types of fraud, and you could say marketing claims. It's going to be a cancer-fighting drug. There's a lot of different things out there that we believe are fraudulent. But really, for food fraud, we really should narrow the scope so that we're focusing on a very, very specific task. And we'll show you why that is later. But it's illegal deception for economic gain using food. And it includes a subcategory of economically motivated adulteration. So if you really are focused on the U.S., U.S. FDA has talked a lot about EMA, but EMA is really technically, by FDA's working definition, a subcategory. It's only a substance for economic gain. It's not all fraud. I just mentioned that. So, and really the broad definition is consistent with really the rest of the world. The GFSI, the U.S. Food Industry, European Commission, ISO, UK, and others. The motivation is economic gain. Now, key here is to present what is and isn't food fraud. So, food defense is a term that you hear as well, or intentional adulteration is a rule in the FSMA Act in the U.S. But food defense, the motivation is traditionally harm or terror. They're trying to hurt someone else. They're trying to economically harm someone else. They're not trying to gain for themselves. And FDA narrowed food defense into wide-scale human health harm only, and I'll show later why that's a real subcategory. There's always an economic threat. Someone's getting harmed, whether it's taxes, avoidance, whether it's a retailer getting cheated when they're buying product, or a consumer not getting what they think when they're buying it. There's always a public health vulnerability, but there's not always a public health threat. So the vast majority of food fraud incidents do not cause a public health threat. So public health agencies naturally focus and shift in and out of dealing and focusing on food fraud. So when melamine was in milk, then there was a big focus because it was a public health threat. After that was away, if there's something that's only an economic harm, then a public health agency naturally would have a lower priority for that because other people are getting sick from something else. And that's something real key here, why interdisciplinary interagency group is important to manage this, because it calibrates these risks on multiple factors, not just a single main metric for a specific ministry or agency. There's a lot of types of food fraud. We won't go into the details of those here now. So what is food fraud? More broadly, this is from the Global Food Safety Initiative. These are all the types of fraud, including two more being overruns and tampering. And you'll see here kind of on the top three, dilution, substitution, and contaminant. Those are really what we think of a lot of this kind of adulteration, fraud, food fraud usually. That's where probably there's going to be the most public health threats. But then there's a lot of different ones in here that are considered to look at the entire scope of food fraud. Unimproved enhancements, mislabeling, counterfeiting. So pure intellectual property is counterfeiting. That's definitely in the scope. Gray market theft and diversion. A key here, if product has been smuggled or diverted from someplace else, say you have product on a shelf that doesn't have your language on it, it's hard to understand a lot about that product. So that would be diversion. Product intended for one market sent to another. We don't know how people have handled that product. And the key with food fraud is that if product is in the marketplace leaking in, then there could be other types of fraud and counterfeiting and things like that. So this broad definition is a little bit in contrast to the U.S. FDA. The U.S. FDA focuses on this substance for economic gain, so that's really in this orange category. But just because the FDA defined EMA as a substance doesn't mean that's the scope of EMA or the laws in the U.S. The Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act, and then FSMA, the Food Safety Modernization Act, really was just a clarification or expansion. But Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act is the main act. All types of fraud are illegal based on that, and have been illegal at least since 1938 when the act was implemented. So that's a key: is your business needs to be producing legal product, and so your retailer has to have legal product on the shelf. Your liability goes up if you don't. So really, the scope is intended to look at all types of fraud. So to understand how food fraud compares to other types of food risks, we look at the food risk matrix. And the key is we're trying to understand the motivation, not the effect. So if melamine was in milk, the effect would be a food safety incident. But the motivation, the root cause, is something else. The root cause is economic gain, is food fraud. The root cause is not food safety. The goal of the adversary, the criminal, is not to create a food safety incident. So what we found in our research is food safety and food defense were concepts that were very well known. And we looked again at when we looked at the root cause, we found for food fraud it was fundamentally different from those two. A human adversary that's trying to not get caught. They may spend a lot of money, time, effort. When we looked at this, we also found that food quality was a separate concept here. And with the food industry, that a lot of these food safety, food defense groups are under a quality assurance, food quality type group. And the processes are really a total quality management process. So being under quality is a really logical way for this to be implemented. On one column, you've got unintentional. You're not trying to create a food fraud or a food quality or food safety incident. On the other side, you've got intentional. So bad guys know what they're doing and why they're doing it. For food defense, the intent is harm, public health, economic, or terror. And the motivation for food fraud is economic gain. They want to keep making money on this. So especially if they're continuing in the market, if it's not a one-off type of crime, they're gonna want consumers to be satisfied with their product. So they're going to want people to not get sick, to feel like the product is high quality. So that's a real key from food fraud. And the key is to separate this out when we're looking at the root cause. Now, we find in Europe mainly now, terrorism is a big focus. So there's been a talk about food terrorism. Terrorism is a tricky term to use because there's a lot of very specific definitions in the scope of someone being involved with a known terrorist group. FDA went a little bit broader than that, wide-scale harm. So this could be this would not be only terrorism. This would be people that were looking for more massive types of harm. So a single disgruntled employee, or one of those economically motivated adulteration would not be in FDA's definition of food defense. But you as a retailer, you as a manufacturer, you as a producer need to address all types of food defense as well. You need to deal with everything in this box to keep your company out of trouble. And so there's a look at the types of fraud or different types of food risks. Finally, EMA is a subcategory. And this was reiterated by FDA's Director of the Office of Foods, Dr. Ostroff, several times last year, and he continues to reinforce that EMA is a subcategory. So food chain vulnerabilities, where does this occur and why? So this is we're broadening to look at definitions, and even within scope, we have to look at even places that fraud occurs. So incoming goods. So this is where there's a lot of focus. That would be product that's imported for a country or for a company. That would be incoming ingredients or finished goods. And then in manufacturing, now it can occur in manufacturing, but a lot of times we've got quality control to make sure that enough spices are put in there. And I would say for a country, this would really be more in country, where product comes in and then a fraud act occurs in the country. This is often where the process ends. And the problem is that, so say whatever the brand is, then that product, once it goes out to the marketplace, can still cause problems. It can lead to recalls and loss of economic value. So we really do need to look at finished goods. This product, once you ship it, your job isn't done. There could be mishandling, there could be stolen goods, there could be product that becomes substandard and you have to return it, recall it. So that's the finished goods that were genuine into the marketplace. Another is looking at technology transfer and contract manufacturing. So someone might give a license for a company in Trinidad to make whatever product it is. Now, with that technology transfer, you really do need to monitor people because maybe they're going to make twice as much, or different ways that they may expand using your brand. Another is contract manufacturing. So these are people that you monitor a lot of times for quality, but you might not look at things like fraud. And so if they already have print plates to make your labels, then who's to say that they don't make twice as many labels? So this is something we haven't considered in the past, but is really critical. And then we've got completely outside the supply chain. This would be things like counterfeiting. So Now you'd say, well, I'm a quality control manager. What am I going to do? Am I going to start flying around the world doing market investigations? No, but people out there do look at that, and your food fraud prevention strategy should cover looking at these products that are outside the supply chain. So this is the entire marketplace, and if you have a product, you need to look at the entire marketplace. Again, product coming in on the shelves here in country is really important to look at. That's part of the problem. But to have a holistic, complete, thorough food fraud prevention strategy, you really should add those products that are being exported. It's most efficient to look at it all at once. The ideas are very similar. So then, really, the thing just to look at is the science and sciences of food fraud prevention. Really to put together a type of task force to look at this, it's very interdisciplinary. So fortunately, we've gone back and done a lot of the research in these other kind of outside areas and synthesized it down. So there's a lot of detail from other disciplines already in the system. Now, we're not saying that we know your country better than you, and we're not saying that we have just one solution that applies to you. What we're saying is the basic concepts are the same. They just need to be adapted for your current set of resources and your marketplace. Implementation steps. So the first step here, following up on your government report, formally and specifically mention food fraud and food counterfeiting as a food safety and economic issue. So it's clearly in your scope. It is a food issue. You've got this inquiry, and you've got these task forces started on that, and that's a real key to start and say this is not someone else's problem. This is a single specific problem. And in order to prevent that health hazard, government should formally and holistically address all types of food fraud, not just adulterant substances. You can have recalls and danger from stolen genuine goods, as easy as with adulterant substances. And the second concept is to create a government with industry-wide food fraud prevention strategy. And so this has been a focus of an academic article. So you have a good resource there and a long detailed report on those first implementations. And with that, I'll close and just say, a lot of ways you can interact with us. Please connect with us. We'd love to continue to adapt our products, our trainings for you, our education. So we'd love to interact. And if you're looking for more information, please let us know. A lot of people to thank. I'm really thankful for the team here in Trinidad and the number of people that have been willing to meet with us, sometimes on a very short notice. But it's really been eye-opening. It's been very important to clarify for us to understand the application, and we've been able to give a lot of great insight, I think. With that, I'll say thank you, and I'll now take questions.